All right, Eszter Csillag, welcome to the Singletrack podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So you strike me as one of those athletes in our sport that is very committed to the craft. It looks like you're working with a nutritionist for races like Western States. There's videos of you on social media doing all this weight and resistance training. On various podcasts, you talk about, going back to the road marathon, for example, to get faster so that you can bring that back to the ultra scene. And I think what I want to ask you about all that is, can you talk about the moment in your trail running career where your mindset changed and you decided that you really wanted to take this sport very seriously? What was that moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I like that you use it as a craft. That moment was for me 2021 CCC. It was 4.5 months after I gave birth to Noemi. And yeah, I got fourth. The time was not really great, but yeah, just that I was fourth at CCC, and it was so like short time after I gave birth that it gave me an image, like a huge boost. And after, I think I started to be more and more committed, and yeah, things then went a bit more quicker after that.
This episode is brought to you by Oladance, wireless Bluetooth headphones which deliver 19 hours of battery life, superior sound, the ability to still hear your surroundings for safety, and an open ear design so you don't get that achy feeling from wearing them for extended periods. I used these earlier this month on my run of the 100-mile wilderness, and if you're curious, head over to oladance.com/ST and use code ST at checkout for $30 off their OWS2 headphones. Also, thanks to Pillar Performance. Pillar, spelled Pillar, is a sports micronutrition company that I was introduced to after having Sam Parsons from Tin Man Elite on the show a while back. I use their pineapple coconut flavored triple magnesium product, which delivers high potency magnesium glycinate for better sleep and added recovery during my training blocks. If you'd like to try Pillar today and you're an American-based listener, head to thefeed.com/pillar and use code Singletrack for 15% off your order. For international listeners, use that same code Singletrack for 15% off, but go to pillarperformance.shop to do so. Yeah, it can't be overlooked that in the process of getting fourth place, the context was, like you mentioned, 4 months after giving birth, an incredible feat. I think one more question I want to ask you there is when you get a result like that, when you get fourth place at CCC, perhaps the most important 100K race in our sport, does your interest in becoming more involved in the sport, does it come out of pressure because you feel like you have this gift and it's sort of your duty to live it out to the best of your ability? Or are you someone that just loves the sport and when you got that kind of result, you're like, great, I was looking for that and now I have an opportunity to invest even further? So is it like more pressure or joy?
Yeah, it's absolute joy. I don't take any pressure. I think it's it's joy. I then, when I decide to do something, I can be very serious and I am committed. So for sure, and here that craft thing comes in, what you just mentioned at the beginning, that I will try to, to approach one thing from different sides to make sure everything is well prepared. But for sure, it's joy. Like for me, that day was, it was such an unexpected result, and I was just so happy, and I think that just that kind of happiness that pushed me forward, and just kept me going, and trying to explore what else I can do.
There's one question that I want to ask you about your background before we talk more about your preparation for UTMB and expectations there and whatnot. From what I understand, just from previous interviews you've done, your husband, your partner, is a foreign diplomat for Hungary, and that's part of the reason why you've been based over in Hong Kong. And I also find it interesting that you've taken on this work with the Pro Trail Runners Association recently. Did that inspiration to work for the Pro Trail Runners Association, does any of that interest come from just your experience, seeing your partner do his work in the political field and wanting to be involved in the politics of our sport in a similar way?
I never did that connection. I think I just felt like that I want to do something, and maybe it's something that I can do well because I'm used to do this kind of things. So it's like a situation where I feel like fine, like dealing with different parties or situations
Yeah.
or challenges. So yeah, but I never made that connection.
Were you pretty instrumental or involved in the new pregnancy policy for UTMB? I'm just thinking back to your experience of running the race in 2021, finishing fourth, 4 months after delivering a child. Were you on the front lines of that new policy just because of your firsthand experience?
Yes, I mean, I was involved in that, and I'm part of the Women Equality Working Group, and I was also part of that the development in of that policy, um, and yeah, so that year I was actually signed up also for Valderrun, and I didn't go. I got refunded like partially, and I went for CCC. It's like I don't I at that time I was fine, but yeah, when things like you start to share with other women and you understand that actually this shouldn't be the norm, then it's really
Mhm.
nice to speak up, work together, and make things change and make a better world for other women.
Talking about how you train for these type of races for a moment, uh, from what I understand, a lot of your training is done in Hong Kong, although at times you do return to Europe and do training there. I think a lot of listeners of the show might not be very familiar with the Southeastern Asia trail running scene. So, uh, talk about what makes training and the lifestyle in Hong Kong so cool for those that are not familiar. Like, what's special about that scene? What makes you interested to get out the door and run those trails every day? Thanks to Brooks for their support of our UTMB coverage. I used their Cascadia 8 way back in 2014 when I was introduced to trails during my through hike of the Appalachian Trail. So this is pretty cool. I've been using their new High Point collection in the field, even during these interviews, as you can see here, particularly their waterproof rain jacket and pants. I think they work well in settings beyond inclement weather. They're just comfortable, they're stylish. I've also been wearing the new and improved Cascadia 17. Everything is on point. Head over to brooksrunning.com/Singletrack to check it all out. Also, thanks to Morton. Morton fueled over 80% of my run during the 100-mile wilderness earlier this month. I used 25 of their hydrogels and 10 of their 225 C bars. They all went down easy, never created palate fatigue, and made me feel good, I think, in large part because of the natural ingredients. These are also the same products used by top athletes like Tom Evans and Kilian Jornet. So head over to Morton.com to take a look and maybe even try some of it all for yourself.
It's an amazing scene. Like the trail running community in Hong Kong is amazing, and the trail running events in Southeast Asia are quite different from Europe, but they are really amazing. And you can explore the nature. You can go and run the races in the jungle or in places where otherwise you cannot get. So it's really another way to explore like the region. And in Hong Kong, many people think it's like a city with skyscrapers, but actually 40% of the city is green. And the trails are really well organized and marked, so it's absolutely safe to run alone. And you have Hong Kong Island, you have New Territories and Lantau, the different islands where you can run. So it's really like uh, it's a really beautiful place to run. During summertime is tough because of the humidity, and during wintertime is amazing because in most of the countries there is winter, and here it's actually, they say it's winter, but it's like 20, 25 degrees and often like sunshine and not that humid. So it's an absolute perfect place to run. And you have the beaches, you have the mountains, and then you can look down on the city, but then you go back into the forest. So it's an amazing place to train.
If you could promote one or two races in Hong Kong to encourage listeners and viewers of this podcast to check out, what would they be and why?
Well, the next one will be Translantau, end of October, which is by UTMB. And for sure, like for Hong Kong runners, the other very important race is Hong Kong 100, which is at the beginning of the race, of the year, sorry, like end of January. That's also a big event. Cool. I would say these two, but there are many others. Like we have races every weekend.
Well, talking more about UTMB now, and I certainly don't want to overlook the fact that you had an incredible performance at Western States earlier this summer, but I do want to focus on UTMB. You mentioned the 4th at CCC 2 years ago, 5th at UTMB last year. What have you learned about yourself in these past couple of performances at UTMB, and what have you decided to work on in this training block to improve on last year's result?
This year was all about Western States, so it was all about speed. And then after Western States, I qualified for UTMB. Prior to that, I signed up for OCC. So it was just after Western States that I just felt that I am in great shape, how my body feels, how my mind, like how mentally I'm feeling. And yeah, if I'm ready to do the right training block and then do a long race, which is longer than Western States. And I just felt ready and I wanted to do that. And yeah, here I am.
What were the most important things that you wanted to work on for this year's UTMB? Like when you think about your performance at this race last year and what went well, what you felt like you could have improved on, what were you trying to work on in, July last month and earlier this month in August to maybe to be more ready or to be more dialed for this year?
Yeah, I think like last year UTMB was my first 100-mile race, and that time, in that moment of my, let's call it, trail running career, it was a perfect race. Like it was something that I executed how I planned it. So for me, it was a dream race. Now what changes that I grew as a runner. I'm different. I have more experience. So I probably approached the whole race in a different way. But that's because I changed throughout this year. And what I wanted to build, like after Western States, I thought, okay, basically, if I'm smart enough, Western States can work as a good tempo run, the last long tempo run before UTMB. And then I need to work on the verticals, like have the elevation, get used to use the pose again. And also not overdoing it. So I had to do a good training block, but keeping in mind that I did 100-mile. So I don't want to burn myself during the training block, but just get ready and fit for the start line. So that was a very interesting balance to do. And yeah, I think we managed to do that. So I'm kind of happy and satisfied how these past few weeks went.
That's exciting to hear. Really cool. And actually, it segues into one more thing I wanted to ask you about, which is you mentioned on social media, I think it was on Instagram a couple of days or weeks ago, that you see yourself as playing with fire when it comes to attempting this Western States UTMB double. And when you think about that, one thing I'm personally curious about is you look at somebody like Courtney Dauwalter, for example, who ran extremely well at Western States, did it again, caught lightning in a bottle at Hard Rock, and then she's going to line up for UTMB as well. When you see her doing that, does that change the calculation for you? Like, does that make this double feel more doable when there's other competitors on the line that have, a similar, if not larger, amount of these big races in their legs already?
I love Courtney. She's amazing, but the race hasn't happened yet. And as an art historian, I am good in research. So I have pretty much done my work in the past, who did the double and how that impacted them. So I'm more focusing on that data, which happened in the past, rather than what will happen in the future. So that is where I'm saying, I'm playing with the fire, because I can say names who hasn't been running since then. I don't want that happens to me. And in that sense, I'm saying, it doesn't matter how I'm performing during the race. I just want to keep running. That's basically, that's my, all the racing comes after. And
fascinating.
So that is where, that is where my thinking is staying.
This episode is also made possible by Features, makers of my favorite trail running socks. They're durable, they're stylish, and they're comfortable. They're trusted by many of the best athletes in our sport. So if you'd like to give them a try, head over to their website, grab a few pairs, and use code Singletrack20 at checkout for 20% off your next order. Also, thanks to Kodiak Cakes, makers of my favorite pancakes. Kodiak has been at the center of so many memorable post-long run group breakfasts for me. And I don't just rave about the great taste. They are also 100% whole grain, and they're packed with 14 grams of protein per serving. That helps immediately with the recovery process. So head over to their website, get yourself a few boxes of their mix, and use code SingleTrack15 at checkout for 15% off your next order. I have to ask you, and I love that you've done all the research and you really deeply know the history of what it takes to do this well. What has been the most interesting data to you about this Western States UTMB double? Like, when you look at past performances, certain athletes, what has stuck out to you as very interesting, and why?
There are people who did great at both. For example, Kilian Jornet or Marianne Hogan, right? So there are, or even Emily Hedgewood. I have to say that, she is a runner who performed great at both, and she kept running without injury. So, for example, she's a great example to look at. For sure, Bess Pascal, that year when she won Western States, everyone was talking about how she was in great shape and whatsoever. But then you see her just biking since then. I don't know her, so I am not in the position to talk. I'm just seeing that it. These are things that might scare you. So I think you have examples from both sides. And here comes in that you need to know your body. And with trail running, especially with ultras, it's so much about being in align with your body, and also being able to say no when it feels like it's not the right thing to do. But I also felt that I have been holding on this year, just focusing on Western States, so I can try and do it now.
I agree completely. I think those are excellent insights, and I think for a lot of these athletes, even the ones that have done it successfully and remain, major names in the sport, it's very hard to contextualize where you are as an athlete in the moment and to get a good broader sense of whether this race is going to benefit you or it's going to cost you long term. And that's part of what makes, I think, this race and this double so alluring and so interesting to go after. Last question that I want to ask you is just about any additional expectations for this race. Obviously, when I see your name on the start line, I think that you'll be able to compete with anybody in this race. Do you feel the same? Like, do you feel, for example, that you're in a position where you could improve on last year's result and, a podium position, for example, or even competing for the win is something that you feel is possible?
There was a book where about trail running where it was saying like it's the win is it cannot be your goal, because if you are in a race and you are not winning, then there you have no more purpose to keep going. So after Western States, I think this time my goal is that this is an occasion that I didn't plan. I am very happy with how my summer um, uh, evolved with Western States, and I want to play more. I want to enjoy the play more. I think I have nothing to lose. So these are my mindset that I have when I will go to the start line, and for sure being grateful that I can do that.
Awesome. Well, Eszter, it's been a pleasure to meet you. It's been a pleasure to chat. I really appreciate all of your perspective. We're wishing you well on race day. We'll make sure to
Thank you.
link to all of your social media in the show notes. Is there anything final that you want to say? Any final thoughts or anything you want to leave the audience with, listeners with, before we go?
Just to enjoy the trails and be happy. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me.